So let's get into the profile. Page 2 is the table of contents, and the 7 sections of the report here are the same as the 7 modules in the program. The first module is designed to introduce the team to the model. There's then a module for each of the 5 behaviors. Then there's a closing module that acts as a final action plan. So we're still in Module 1, the intro module. And on page 3, participants will see the pyramid and they can read the definitions of the 5 behaviors. And as part of the facilitation, participants will also get to see a video that explains the model and how these behaviors are linked to each other. Then we go on to page 4, and the team gets its first peek at how it rated itself on the 5 behaviors. Now, this is just an overview, and they'll get a lot more specific information on each level of the pyramid later on. Now, the scores for each behavior are an average of the team's rating, and they range from 1 to 5, with higher being better. And you can see the key in the upper left-hand corner. 3.24 and below is considered low. 3.25 to 3.75 is considered medium. And 3.76 and above is considered high. And these are the norms that Patrick Lencioni and his team of consultants have developed after years of working with thousands of teams on this assessment. All right, but what's important to remember is that the ultimate focus is not on how you compare to other teams, but really on how your team can improve. Where are the best opportunities for growth? If you only have a certain amount of energy to spend on growth, where are your best levers? The section on trust begins on page 5. Here you'll see at the top an explanation of what we really mean by trust. Again, we're talking about vulnerability-based trust. And in the facilitation, you'll have some videos that help illustrate this concept. Then below on page 5, we've got the team's average response to each of the 4 items on this scale. So that is to say, for each of the 5 behaviors, there are 4 items or statements that are used to measure that behavior. There are 4 for trust, 4 for conflict, 4 for commitment, and so on. So you see the 4 trust items on this page, along with the overall trust score that is repeated from page 4. Now, the team will have a little bit of discussion about their reactions here, but the discussion will get a lot deeper when we turn to pages 6 and 7. So let's do that. Here we see a breakdown of the 4 items along with the narrative on each one. And that text is dynamic. It'll change depending on how your team filled out the survey. It'll take into account information like, what was the overall mean? Was there disagreement on this item? On these pages, the team will get a chance to talk about what these results really mean and really to get their heads around what vulnerability-based trust will even look like in their group. Okay, so that was all about the assessment of the team, where we are right now. When we move to pages 8 and 9, the focus is now on how we can start to build more trust. And this is where DISC first comes in. On page 8, you'll see a description of the model, and there's a video in the facilitation to help explain the model. But then on page 9, we've got this really meaty explanation of your style. If you've used a lot of DISC products, you've probably seen pages like this before, and there are a lot of different ways over the years that people have found to facilitate it. But I think one of the most straightforward is to simply have people read the page, underline the things that they agree with, and cross out the things that they don't resonate with them. Okay, and now that you've seen where you are on DISC, you want to know where everybody else falls. So that's where page 10 comes in. And this is a lot of fun for people because they get to see where everybody else fell, and there's a lot of ahas. And so what does this have to do with trust? Well, the whole purpose of this module is about vulnerability. And understanding another person's style is a great starting point to begin accepting our differences and actually growing to value those differences. We want to get to a point where I understand where you come from and you understand where I come from. I feel like you understand me. I feel like I can be myself around you. And so I can be candid. I can be honest. I can be transparent. There's no need for me to be guarded or secretive. I can tell you how I really genuinely feel about your ideas and your behaviors. That's the whole purpose of this trust module. All right, then we get to pages 11 and 12, where we are wrapping up. These pages are asking the question, what can we do differently in the future? Now, page 11 is a really neat page. It uses the team culture items that were asked in the assessment. Here specifically, people were asked, basically, what are some of the ways that we could increase trust on this team? You can see the stem there that says there would be more trust on our team if people blank, if people reduced the amount of gossip or admitted their mistakes. The numbers in those boxes tell you the number of people that selected that response. And people could choose as many as they wanted. So this is a great place to start having a conversation about how we want our team to look differently in the future. And you can see the discussion questions below that. Those are dynamically generated, which means that they'll change based on how your team responded to the questions above. Then finally, on page 12, we've got an action planning page. There are two main parts here. On the top, in the gray box, you'll see a description of what teams look like when they have trust and when they don't have trust. And this is a pretty rich summary to have a discussion around. Then below are action planning questions that are, again, dynamically generated, specific to your team. And as part of the facilitation, consider tracking the decisions that get made on this page so that you'll have them when you get to the end of the program as a whole. And there's a handout in the facilitation that will help you with that. Okay, so that's trust. But before we move on to the conflict section, I wanted to point out a pattern in the profile. So real quick, I'll ask you to turn back to page 5. All right. So here on page 5, you've got an introduction to the behavior and a summary of the scores on the 4 questions within that behavior. Each section for the other 4 behaviors, that is to say the conflict section, commitment section, accountability, and results, is going to open up the exact same way. You'll see this as a very similar looking page for each of those sections. All right, and then we turn the page and see the breakdown of those questions with some narrative. Again, each of the other sections for the other 4 behaviors is going to have this same type of information. It may not be broken down exactly the same way, but it'll look very similar. Then we look at pages 8, 9, and 10. These pages are all on disk. And the other sections for the other behaviors will also have a segment on disk. For the most part, they won't be as extensive as this segment here in trust, but they will be there. Then we turn to page 11. This page is based on the culture items from the assessment. And the other sections for the other behaviors will also have pages like this. Then finally, on page 12 is the action planning page. And as you've probably guessed by now, each section for trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, and results will also have its own action planning page. All right. The conflict section starts on page 13 in the same way that the trust section started. We see the 4 items that make up the conflict scale. And then on page 14, we expand on those items. At the bottom of that page is a paragraph that explains how I tend to behave in conflict based on my DISC style. And page 15 talks about how each of the 4 styles might behave in conflict. Then on page 16 is the conflict team map. This is a map that gives an overview of some of the different healthy and unhealthy behaviors that we all use in conflict. We might not want to admit it, but we all tend to use them. And different conflict behaviors are associated with different DISC styles. But you need to remember this is only a rough guide. Even though retreating from conflict is most typical for the CS style, there are going to be some people with the I style who employ this coping mechanism as well. And there are going to be some people with the CS style that get very dramatic during conflict. Really, the purpose of this page is to start a safe discussion about how we handle conflict in the workplace, or whatever setting you're in. Then on page 17, we see the result of a set of team culture questions. This time, the question is about what behaviors are appropriate or inappropriate during conflict. Personally, this is one of my favorite pages. It's a great jumping off point for creating a set of mutually agreed upon guidelines that we can all use during conflict and we can all point to during conflict. Okay, so we've gone through the introduction, the trust section, and the conflict section. And at this point, you've seen the pattern. The next three sections, commitment, accountability, and results, all follow that same pattern. So that just leaves us with the final section, the summary, which is on pages 35 and 36. Both of these pages start with 3 items, either your 3 highest or your 3 lowest. Then the pages give you bullets drawing out some highlights. And then there are some discussion points that are dynamically generated specifically for your team. And that's the end of the report.